Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Stage Distribution and Manufacturing Operations webinar for today. So today we're going to be talking about streamlining physical counts and best practices and strategies. And bear with me here 1 second. All right, so for the sake of today, and just to make sure everyone's on common terminology, I wanted to just start off with talking about the different types of inventory physicals or inventory counting that there is. So the first one you hear pretty regularly is a physical inventory count. And a physical inventory count is a systematic way in which a company's stock is counted and recorded by staff using a predefined method. The process usually ensures accuracy in regards to tracking inventory levels and is typically conducted at the end of a reporting period just to check what inventory you have in stock and also reconcile any discrepancies. And one thing I just wanted to mention is that different companies will do physicals at different times. We frequently see it at year end or at the end of a fiscal year end if you're not calendar year. We also see people do it on a quarterly basis. And so next thing we'll talk about is what's a cycle inventory count? And really a cycle inventory count, or cycle counting as you've probably heard it called, is an inventory management process where instead of counting all of the inventory items, you're really just counting a subset of the inventory items on some sort of regular and reoccurring basis. The intent is that rather than performing a full physical, you're able to do smaller hunks of the warehouse or locations, and that really allows you to keep visibility on individual inventory items with the intent that if your segmenting or cycles are set up correctly, you ultimately get through the whole warehouse, throughout the year. I apologize, All right, so what's the purpose behind an inventory physical count? And so when we talk about a physical count inventory, we're really looking at getting a tally of all the stock and having the stock manually count each item. So when we talk about the physical part is literally that someone's going into the racks, they're looking at the items, they're counting the items up, and in the mantra I always like to say, leaving no stone unturned. You're literally going through the warehouse and leaving no stone unturned for inventory. Key reasons or objectives to do this is to really verify the inventory levels. It's making sure that what you physically have in the warehouse matches what the system thinks you have, right? It also helps detect theft or loss. And usually what we'll see here is if there's a large discrepancy between what the system thinks you have and what you actually find on the floor, that can really indicate that you have potentially shrink or shrinkage and or possibly damaged, loss, or theft. So doing a routine physical helps you identify those potential items. It also helps create an accurate budget. So for businesses planning future inventory purposes, knowing exactly how much inventory you have in stock really gives you true visibility to how much inventory do you need to buy. And then reporting accurate earnings, inventory being accurate really helps make sure that cost of goods sold, gross profit, net income are all accurate and being reported correctly. They all tie in together. So the other reason or times that we see people doing physical counts is also when lending money to banks or lending money from banks. In the intent of many banks, inventory is used as collateral on the loan. And so the bank may actually warrant that the inventory have a physical count regularly to ensure that the amount of inventory stated on the books is truly the amount of inventory you have in stock. It also can be part of a regulation in certain industries that inventory is routinely shifted, used, and evaluated so that any old, outdated, or expired inventory is retired and put away. Purpose of a cycle count inventory, and really the big one with this is it's just the ability to do the inventory in smaller increments, right? So you may pick a section of the warehouse and just count what's in the section of that warehouse. You may pick one particular inventory item and count all of that inventory item, or maybe a whole row in a warehouse. But the idea is that it's a targeted approach, usually focused on specific items, especially ones that have high value or high turnover. Unlike a full inventory, there usually isn't any downtime associated with cycle counting. It's just something you do during the regular business day and then put your findings into the system. It also helps improve accuracy because if you're counting more frequently and or looking at items where what you see visually in the warehouse doesn't match what the system says you have, it helps you proactively identify those problems before you get into that next physical. One thing I also wanted to preface with this is cycle counts are really good if you're dealing with products that have long shipping times. We often hear from customers where they're literally shipping something from a slow boat to China. And so cycle counting those inventory items helps them proactively stay ahead of it. Do they have enough inventory in stock to fulfill the orders coming in, and or do they need to proactively plan to purchase more? So those might be the reasons why you would do a cycle count. All right, so pros and cons of, the different types of inventories. We've got manual completion, electric counting, cycle counting, and full inventory. So, really when we talk about manual completion and electronic, both of these are really methods of doing cycle and full, right? So manual is old school, piece of paper. You just walk around, cycle count something. I've seen people do spreadsheets and they'll, walk around with a laptop and update something in a spreadsheet. But the idea behind the manual completion is really, you are using paper records. It's a low cost way from a material side to do a physical count, but it can have a high rate of errors. Somebody misplaces a piece of paper, or, they miss an inventory item altogether because they forgot to write it down. Electronic counting is typically with scanners, RFID, barcodes, or mobile devices. This really will reduce a lot of the, typical errors we see with people transposing numbers, maybe writing down the wrong SKU. The scanner will actually enforce the integrity of what you are counting, but it does still actually, require extra time and resources. So with cycle counts, if we're using either methodology, again, you're just counting random portions or rotating sections of the warehouse and inventory. The big plus with doing cycle counting is you don't have to really do a full operational shutdown to do a cycle count. And so a lot of companies like this cycle counting because it really gives them a quick snapshot or way to self-correct inventory without doing the full physical. And at the end of the day, it may actually be less time than doing a full-on physical. Full inventory, again, most people will do this at least once a year. We do typically see shutdowns with this. The shutdowns are usually a day or two where the entire staff gets involved in counting the warehouse and reports the findings. We've also seen it where full inventory is just a solid day, but the intent here is that during these typical full inventories, you're not shipping, picking, packing, or manufacturing anything. It's a all hands on deck type of inventory. And so with each one of these, there's goods and bads. It really just depends on the industry you're in, regulations and requirements, and whether you have any loans from your bank that might drive some of your options. And so benefits of performing a full physical inventory, it really does keep the records up to date for better sales and forecasting. The reason we mention this is that if you're doing everything at one snapshot time, you can really trend from one physical to another to see how inventory are going. How does that meet your forecasting? Is it above or below? It also does help with ensuring that the precise levels of stock are really what you think they are. I figure this is a good metric of if you're constantly finding that you have more items in your system than what you have on the shelves, doing routine physical inventory counts really help you proactively identify those issues and or correct them to prevent stockouts. Loss prevention, we do find in companies where they routinely do physical counts and it's known that they routinely do physical counts, we see a lot less issues with people trying to either seal the merchandise or, if it's broken, reporting that it's broken. Also, too, if you're carrying food, beverage, or things that have expiration dates on them, routine physical counting will allow you to move the inventory so that perhaps the older inventory is in the front to be picked first. And we do find it does have increased profitability. Again, you're identifying maybe inventory that's going to go bad so you can list it for quick sell. But it also helps too if you have slower moving products, possibly running a sale to help move those products out of the warehouse. And so benefits of performing a cycle count, biggest one is obviously it just reduces the need, or I don't know if that would necessarily reduce it completely, but it really helps hold off until a full physical count can be done. This is a great one when you're eyeballing the shelves and you're like, hey, I've got way more inventory on the shelf than what's in my system, or vice versa. Cycle count really helps with that. It also does allow you to, because of this, correct those discrepancies real time, right? So you're not waiting until the physical at the end of the year, or the end of the quarter to make those corrections. You can make it real time. Because cycle counting is done in smaller hunks, you can get by with doing it with fewer resources, right? You just have one person that might be their regular job to go out and cycle count as opposed to closing the whole warehouse. And it does really help identify reoccurring issues. So if we're constantly seeing an item that's missing from the shelves, even though the books think we have it, that can help address either theft, or if there's just workflow errors, those things tend to come to light a little quicker with a cycle count. All right, so best practices for inventory physical count, first and foremost, really plan ahead. It's super important when you're doing a physical to make sure you've got detailed policies and just clear instructions on how the inventory is going to be conducted. If departments are shutting down, what does that definition of shutdown mean for them? Wherever possible, do try to use technology, having scanners, or even just, people walking around with laptops and Excel spreadsheets. If scanners aren't in your budget, that's still better than the old paper method. Making sure that the people you have on staff doing the physical count are really striving for accuracy and being attentive counters. I've seen people where, they're not willing to climb the shelves and really count the items, or they're not doing the proper math on case counts, and then that ends up with discrepancies. Before you finalize your inventory, make sure you really address those discrepancies, right? So if your system says, oh, I have 1,000, but somebody only counts 100, well, you should send them back out to recount that item, because that's a big discrepancy. And it could be that they just missed a section of the warehouse. Do a mock count. So we've had customers in their test companies or test environments go through and practice doing an inventory count just to make sure that their procedures are really right. Hiding item prices, but also hiding item quantity on hand. That can prevent bias during counting, but also prevent people from cheating, right? So if they see on the sheet, hey, there's 20, they go look in the shelves and they're like, meh, it looks sort of like it's 20. You find that people may not count because of that. We do think it's a best practice to really pause operations when you can. This just allows for a full count of the inventory and prevents any mistakes where people think that inventory might be in a state of being shipped or in a state of being manufactured. Pausing the operations allows everybody to really get into that count and get it done. Limiting the staff, making sure that it's really just the necessary people on site. I've seen where they'll close warehouses and let the other staff off for the day while they do the physicals. Secure inventory. If you have inventory that's a high roller, high dollar value, you may want to lock it down or limit the access to the users who can get to that. And then most importantly, using inventory software. Everything we've talked about really stems on having true inventory software that allows you to really track all of your inventory. If you're using just straight up Excel, it's really hard to gauge when there's a flux in inventory, or if there's trending with fluxes in inventory. It's really hard to see that in a spreadsheet, and this is really where accounting software can really help with that endeavor. All right, so best practices for a cycle count, and a lot of these are the same, but probably the big one, prioritize your inventory, right? So don't spend your time doing cycle counting on slow moving, low dollar item inventory. Really, with cycle counting, you want to focus on the high dollar ones where if a stock out were to occur, it could result in lost business for the company. Those are the areas you want to focus on first. Also, any inventory you have where if it expires, making sure that the expiration dates are being properly, properly prioritized and sent out. Scheduling regular counts. So a lot of customers that we work with will have some sort of scheduler routine. So for example, every Wednesday morning at 9, the warehouse person is going to go out and count a section of the warehouse. The consistency of the routine really helps make sure that if, one, there are issues that are brought to light, you can have the time to address them. But two, also making sure that the cycle counting doesn't fall off by the wayside. We find that customers that don't have a routine with cycle counting will often put it to the back burner to the point where they're just waiting for that full physical. Wherever you can, we do encourage using technology, whether it's inventory software like your accounting system, barcode scanners, but you really want to have something that's allowing you to track not only what you counted, but also in many accounting systems, what you should count next, right? And what you counted last. So you ensure that you are indeed getting the full warehouse. Very important to train your staff, make sure you educate them on what's the proper procedures. This all goes back to really having a write-up on how you do your inventory and the best way to do it. Just like with physicals, making sure you address the discrepancies quickly. So if you find that something is really wrong, and I'll go back to my, hey, there's 1,000 in the system, there's only 100 on the shelf, that's a big discrepancy, and someone should really be digging into where did the 900 go, right? Was it a PO that didn't get entered in or counted in? Is it, inventory that maybe got booked into the system but never actually got received because it was returned? Getting a handle on those discrepancies quickly is the whole point of doing these. So if you find discrepancies but then do nothing with that info, then you're really not serving the purpose of that cycle count. Integrating it with operations, because you can do cycle counting while operations are going on, really try to align it with low activity periods. Great example, customer of mine on Fridays typically doesn't ship a lot. And so they'll often go out and do cycle counting on Fridays because they just know there's not a lot of product moving around the warehouse. Do rotate your inventory. This just makes sure that, one, items are all getting counted periodically, but it also helps with identifying if you have older inventory that needs to get shipped. The rotating of the inventory will help catch that. Minimize your disruptions. So we talked about, again, you can do cycle counts without having to pause operations. Always make sure you document results. This is really going to help you for trending, seeing what those trends are, and then audit your process. So again, back to our standard operating procedures, really making sure that each time you do the count, is there a tweak in the workflow we need to make? And so that's where that will come in. All right, I'm not going to read through all this, but these are just some key metrics that we pulled together on formulas, really looking at your inventory turnover ratio, WIP inventory, order cycle. In general, these are really good to follow if you're a publicly traded company, if you are working with venture capitalist groups. These are sometimes things they'll ask for. It's also good too if you're borrowing money from a bank. A lot of times the bank loan will stipulate certain metrics on your inventory, and all of these will help. All of these various formulas can help with those calculations. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about streamlining inventory count. So I just want to preface by saying, for today's presentation, we're going to be focusing on Sage distribution and manufacturing operations. However, I do want to highlight that pretty much everything I'm covering in here, most systems will allow you to do these things. Different systems have different features. So not every system has multi-bin or allocation functionality, but just about any accounting system with inventory will do the basic, what I'll call inventory type functions. And so I will be using SDMO to show this, but just wanted to preface that. But counting inventory is really a key business activity. And you want to make sure their inventory management system, if you've invested in one, has the right stock in the right locations to meet customer demand. The number one cause of stock outs, longer shipping times, failure to meet promised demand is typically either one, the stock in the system is just wrong, or it's right, but it's not in the right location in the warehouse, right? So if you have a massive warehouse, having inventory that is on the shelf somewhere but not in the right place in the system can really create a lot of heartburn. And so SDMO really does help you see stock on items by warehouse and bin location. You know, if you're doing a physical count or a cycle count, it helps you really prepare for and perform it. It also helps you too with determining your preferred method for recording changes, right? So depending on how you're booking your inventory, you can either do an inventory adjustment, which means I'm just going to adjust up or adjust down what I counted. Or if I'm doing a full physical, I can physically change the number of the quantity on hand. And all of this is audited and recorded so you can actually report on it. And then most of all, it does allow you, best of all, it does allow you to choose which model of inventory counting works best for you. Most organizations that we work with do a hybrid of both full physical counts, typically once a year or once a quarter, along with cycle counts on a lot of their higher dollar, higher moving items to help ensure that they don't have stock outs. All right, and so now let's go ahead and get into SDMO. And along the way of this, I'm also going to talk a lot about best practices and really sharing what some of those things look like. So now I'm going to head into the stock area. So this is our SDMO software, and if you haven't seen it before, I have countless webinars and how-tos on what a lovely product this is. So feel free to check all of that out. And so first thing I'm going to do is head over to stock inquiries. And I'm going to view my stock detailed inquiry. Now, a couple of things when you're really preparing for a full-on physical count. One thing you want to make sure of is that for the items that you're counting, if you have an inventory system where posting is required, or if there's an inventory system where there's allocations, when you're doing a full physical, it's considered a best practice to, wherever possible, post absolutely everything that's touching inventory. So whether it's a receiver coming in on a purchase order, or if it's an order you're shipping out, at the end of the day, what we want to make sure of is that the quantity on hand really does match out with the quantity on the floor. And so the best practice is to make sure you've done all your posting before starting. So in this case, you'll see SDMO is a multi-warehouse, multi-company accounting system, but for where we're at, I actually just want to look at one location. So let's say today I'm going to be doing a full physical on Acme distribution. And note, I'm saying full physical, but all the rules apply even if I'm just doing cycle counting. The first thing you'll see is I've filtered my site down to Acme distribution. And one thing I want to point out is SDMO does allow for allocations. So an allocation could be inventory coming in that hasn't been posted. It could be inventory that's on a shipper. It could be inventory that's on a work ticket. What I love about SDMO is that I can click on my allocations button and immediately see where are my allocations. So in this case, anything that starts with SH, well, those are shipping documents. So at this juncture, I can either work through shipping and posting all these items, or if I know that all of these items are located on the loading dock and they're easily countable, I may just note that I'm going to count my shipping or my shipping location to ensure this inventory is accounted for. And again, one of the most important things when you're dealing with inventory, make sure there's a dialogue about, okay, if we have allocations, how do those get treated, right? So I can see here, I've got 37 allocated to the Acme storage bin. You want to make sure you've had a conversation about, are we leading the allocation there and making sure we count these 37? Are we getting rid of the allocation, you know, by shipping the product out? Or you can delete the allocation on the item, right? So it's just important to have that conversation well before you start doing the physical count. So in this case, if I want to go ahead and export my list out, and so if I opt not to do scanners, and you'll see, I see this quite often with a lot of customers where maybe they're just doing a cycle count, or in this particular case, this isn't a huge warehouse, it's a small inventory, so I don't need to do a full-blown scanning endeavor. I can manage this in Excel. Now, one thing I do want to also talk about when we deal with best practices is really talking about the quantity on hand and the quantity available and the allocated quantity. So when I exported this, I had my view pre-configured to show these fields. A lot of times when people are doing counting, they'll hide or delete those columns. And the rationale behind it is that if I'm asking someone to go out and count my 61 series chair or count my 51 series chair, I want them to really count this item in this location to ensure what I have. And if they can see the item number or the quantity on hand, it does lead to integrity issues. Did they really count it, or did they just say that the number was the same? So now at this point, I could share this with my team. A lot of times if you're doing Excel, I've seen people do this on laptops or, on tablets where they'll just share out the spreadsheet and have a column they'll add in here. And we'll just say quantity counted. I've also seen where they might say counted by. And also, if we're doing cycle counting, one thing that's pretty slick is I can either in here delete the bins that I don't want them to look at, or if I'm a cycle count, a lot of times in locational warehouses, I may decide I only want to cycle count, let's say maybe the receiving bin, or I want to cycle count the Acme 2 receiving bin. And now what you'll see is I've actually effectively filtered my receiving down to one location. So if I'm doing cycle counting, I can actually let the system tell me, well, this is what supposedly is in this bin. And again, I can just hit export to Excel and drop this out. So it doesn't need to be some fancy export or some sort of tool. If I don't have scanning technology, you'll see that I'm able to get by quite well without it. So this is a great way for just doing quick cycle counts on items to share the item information. Now, I've also seen where people won't share the items that are in the bin. They'll just say, go count the receiving bin. So you could take it a step further and actually remove those items. So now, once you've completed the count, well, then you have some choices, right? So in SCMO, there's really a few ways to get stock back into the system. One is you can do a stock change, which basically says, stock count, which is where you can actually say, I'm doing a physical count. This is what my stock count is. If I'm doing cycle counting, then I may actually just do a stock adjustment. And the difference between the two is when you do a stock adjustment, you are adding in or subtracting from inventory the quantity that's missing, right? So if I find an item, I lost an item, then the adjustment's going to be 1 for finding the item, right? Or it's going to be -1 because I lost an item. When you're doing a stock count, then you're telling it what the quantity on hand is, and then the system is doing the adjustment for you. So if you're doing a full-on physical, stock count is the way you want to do it. If you're just trying to do one-off entries for cycle counting, that would be a stock adjustment. And so for today, I'm just going to do a quick adjustment to show you how this works. So I'm going to do my Acme distribution. Note, here's my date. And it's asking me for the adjustment reason. So I'm going to say I'm increasing the quantity. And then I can actually put a description. I could just say found, item by loading dock. Or the other one I see a lot is found item in an incorrect bin, right? So maybe I had it in the receiving bin, but we actually found it in the storage bin, right? So I could come in here and do a positive adjustment to put it in here. I could also do a bin to bin transfer if I wanted to. So now what I'll do is I'll pick my chair here. We'll do our 61 series chair. And it tells me my stock quantity. I'm going to adjust it by 1. Then it's asking me, well, where'd you find it, right? So I want to tell it, in this case, if I found it in my receiving, I would tell it. And with SCMO, you do have the ability to say, well, what's the quality control, right? So accepted, quality control, rejected. So if you have workflow regulations where an inventory item needs to be checked and approved before it's put on the floor, I could do quality control. If I found the item that maybe it's damaged, well, I might put it to rejected status because I'm going to return it to the vendor. But for now, I'll just do it as accepted. And notice my new stock quantity is now going to be 101. So I'm going to save this. And with SDMO, it does say, hey, there's some details still required. So before I can post it, I do have to provide it with the stock details. And in this case, what it's looking for is, because this was a lotted item, I do have to give it a lot number. All right. And note, using stock adjustments also allows you to change lot numbers if needed. All right, so once I've posted my stock, the next thing you want to make sure of is, after posting, make sure that your stock is correct. We often see people will, do their physical, they'll do their cycle changes, but they forget to post the changes. And then we get a phone call a day or two later saying, hey, I did my inventory count, but this widget is still showing as a negative item, but I know I counted it, right? And usually when we do a deep dive, we just find out they forgot to click the post stock button, or they forgot to post an update. So once you're done your physical and you've signed up on it, or you've done your cycle count, absolutely make sure that you come back in and verify that the item is done. So now you'll see I went back to my stock detailed inquiry. Here's my 61 series chair. You'll see I now have one in stock in my Acme receiving bin, and there's my lot number. So I've verified that indeed this item has come in. And that's probably the single most important step post inventory, because it is the one we see people miss the most often, is making sure that they validated that inventory. All right, so just key points to remember. When you're using, whether you're using SDMO manufacturer operations or some other ERP solution, and whether you do a full physical count or a cycle count for your inventory, there's really just a few important things I wanted to remind you about. If your system does do allocations to inventory, really make sure you have a discussion regarding how the inventory is going to be treated when you get into, and I apologize, my slide had a mind of its own. I do apologize. If your system, so the allocations, making sure you have conversations about how allocations are handled. The number one culprit of an inventory gone bad we've seen is if things are wrapped and on a pallet and someone counts them, but they shouldn't have counted them, or they didn't count them and they should have. It really can distort the inventory count, especially because if it's wrapped up and on the shipping dock ready to go out, but Sage or SDMO hasn't reflected that in their system yet, well, that can lead to a bad count. So make sure you've got conversations around, hey, if we've allocated inventory, we're either going to delete the allocation from the system, we're going to post it all the way through. Make sure you have a flow for handling that. Know how you're going to get the count into your system, right? Are you doing it as a physical count? Or are you going to do it as an adjustment? A lot of the systems, SDMO included, do allow you to import your inventory physical in, right? So if you're going to do it as a physical count, that's a different form of importing than if you're going to do it as just an adjustment. So knowing how you're getting the count in is really going to determine the format of the file and what information you need to carry. Physical count, you're going to have the quantity counted. Adjustment, you're going to have the quantity that's either missing or found. During your counting process, you want to make sure that the system quantity on hand, do you want that to be known to the person counting? I will say that in a lot of companies that we've worked with, if it's a bank regulated situation or if it's an audit, they will actually insist that the person not know the quantity on hand because it can lead to integrity issues with the system count. Verifying stock levels counted. So once you've done the count, the most important thing is really looking at it before you just blindly put it into your system to challenge, like, hey, does this make sense, right? So again, back to my original item, if I have 1,000 in the system, but I only have 100 on the shelf, I may ask for a recount before I put that into the system, because it's quite possible maybe they missed inventory on the top shelf, or they forgot to count the overflow bin, or in segments of freezers and things like that, maybe they missed a section. But definitely when you have heavy outliers, making sure that you're verifying and recounting those items before blindly posting is pretty important. And most important of all, and this is something our firm does a lot, creating a standard operating procedure, right? So we've talked throughout the whole webinar about different areas to really consider, what things to make sure you've talked about with the team, but making sure you write this down, because another thing we've seen pretty often is inconsistent counting, right? They do a count in December, they get one number. They do a count in March, they get a totally different number. Oh boy, we have a big swing. Now we do a count in June. Well, if the procedures aren't the same from one inventory physical to another, now you open the door for questioning, was our process the same from the first count to the third count, right? And banks will actually, if they're loaning you money and tying inventory as collateral, may actually ask for proof of your standard operating procedures and how you're counting your inventory. So it's a really good best practice to have it. It also helps if you have staff turnover. We've run into quite a few situations over the years where the lead warehouse manager left or the primary person running point on physical count left. And because we had operating procedures in place, another person was able to step in and really perform that physical count without a whole lot of extra stress and frustration. So I can't stress enough, these operating procedures are key. And of course, why Stewart Technologies, right? So we've really worked with countless companies to prepare for, execute, and write SOPs for managing their inventory accounting needs. We're actually one of the few firms out in the marketplace that supports QuickBooks, Sage 50, 100, Intech distribution, manufacturing operations, SDMO. So it really does give us quite a breadth when it comes to inventory and some of the challenges you might run into that could be system specific. So that really helps us in terms of picking the best package that might work for your inventory management needs. But because of the diversity, we can also support your business as it grows. We've had customers over the years that have gone from QuickBooks to 100, or they have gone from QuickBooks maybe to SDMO. But it really allows us the ability to allow them to grow as their inventory management needs and change. And we really do have a strong commitment to workflow and efficiency. We're all about how can we make this work well for you? How can we make your workflow streamlined without you working around the system to do it? And we have over 26 years of experience in the distribution and manufacturing space. Combined team-wise, I think we probably have like 40 years, if not more, but 26 just in my little body. And if you enjoyed what you saw today, just some great resources out there. We do have coming up on December 12th, physical counts with Sage Intacct. So if you're using Sage Intacct for inventory, this could be a great one for you. I also do regular little 5-minute webinars on various pieces of the SDMO. So if you really like the SDMO product, this is a great thing for you to sit on. There's a link in here right to LinkedIn where you can follow it. And if you're really not sure of the direction, or, maybe you're using an inventory system today and you're just not sure how to prepare for that physical count, that's okay. Reach out to us and let us know. Jessica Gardner is our customer success manager. You can reach her at this phone number here or click to book a call with her. And if you want to learn more about Stewart Technologies, just come visit us at stewarttechnologies.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you.